She was 8 years old when she noticed it, the hardness in her mother's eyes after another 14-hour shift at the factory, the mechanical way her father moved through the house, checking off invisible boxes on some eternal list of tasks that never ended, the way adults around her had learned to turn themselves into machines, efficient and emotionless, because the world demanded it, and something in her small chest tightened with resistance. A quiet voice whispered, "I will not become that. I will stay soft even if it costs me everything." This is the story Weber never fully told. The story of those who refuse the iron cage, even as its bars close in around them. The women especially, though he barely noticed them, who maintained what he called value-rational action in a world that had become purely instrumental, who preserved warmth in systems designed to freeze it out, who insisted on meaning when everything around them measured only efficiency. Weber documented how modernity creates the iron cage of rationalized existence, but he spent far less time studying those who resist it from within, those who see the cage clearly and choose anyway to remain human inside it, to stay soft when hardness is rewarded, to value relationships when only productivity is measured, to insist on beauty when everything is reduced to function. Today we explore what Weber called the most dangerous position in modern society, not the position of those who rebel loudly against rationalization, but those who participate in it consciously while maintaining an inner life that refuses to be commodified, and why Weber believed this feminine resistance, this insistence on preserving the irrational in a rationalized world, might be the only thing that saves us from the complete mechanization of the soul. But first you need to understand what Weber meant by the cold system, what he called the iron cage of rationality. In The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, Weber traced how Western society transformed from a world animated by meaning, tradition, and spiritual purpose into one governed purely by instrumental calculation. Where once people asked what gives life meaning, now they ask only what produces results. Where relationships were ends in themselves, now they become means to professional advancement. Where work served life, now life serves work. Weber wrote that the Puritan wanted to work in a calling, but modern man is forced to. The cage that was once entered voluntarily became a prison with invisible bars made of economic necessity, social expectation, and psychological conditioning. But here lies what Weber observed about gender and rationalization. Men, shaped by Protestant work ethic psychology and economic imperative, adapted more readily to instrumental rationality. They learned to suppress emotional response in favor of calculated action. They internalized the logic that worth equals productivity, that efficiency justifies existence. They became, as Weber put it, specialists without spirit, living in systems that demanded they abandon the very qualities that make life worth living. Women, especially those operating in domestic and relational spheres less fully rationalized, maintained longer what Weber called substantive rationality, the ability to evaluate actions based on ultimate values rather than mere efficiency, to ask not just does this work but is this right, is this beautiful, does this nurture the soul, and the system punished them for it, called them impractical, emotional, inefficient. Because a woman who insists on meaning in a world that measures only output is a threat to the entire rationalized order. Because if she is right that life requires more than productivity, then everything the system is built on collapses. Weber observed this pattern most clearly in what he called the rationalization of intimate life, the transformation of even love, family, and personal relationships into instrumentalized exchanges. In modern society, he wrote, even the most intimate relationships are increasingly governed by calculation rather than genuine feeling. The rise of dating as strategic partner selection, marriage as economic arrangement, parenting as resume building for children, friendship as networking, love itself becoming a cost-benefit analysis. And in the middle of this systematic coldness, some women simply refused. They maintained what Weber termed charismatic authority in the personal sphere. Not the charisma of leaders and prophets he studied extensively, but the everyday charisma of those who insist that people have intrinsic worth beyond their utility, who create spaces of warmth in cold systems, who practice what he called value rationality, acting according to ultimate values even when instrumental calculation suggests otherwise. These women became what Weber never quite named but consistently observed: the guardians of meaning in a disenchanted world, the keepers of irrational love in a rationalized society, the living contradiction to the system's claim that efficiency justifies everything. But Weber understood something most people miss. This soft resistance is not weakness. It is the most dangerous form of power. Because you cannot coerce someone who refuses to value what the system rewards. You cannot control someone whose sense of worth comes from sources the market cannot touch. You cannot rationalize someone who has consciously chosen to remain partially irrational. Let me tell you about Maria, though Weber never met her. Maria worked as a nurse in a hospital system governed entirely by efficiency metrics: patient throughput, average handling time, outcome measurements. Everything rationalized, everything measured, everything designed to maximize productivity per labor hour. The system rewarded nurses who moved quickly, who didn't waste time on emotional support, who understood patients as units to be processed rather than humans to be cared for. Maria's performance reviews consistently noted her inefficiency. She spent too long with patients. She held hands when she should be charting. She listened to stories when she should be administering medication. She wasted valuable time on activities that didn't appear in any billing code. And she knew exactly what she was doing. Because Maria had read enough, experienced enough, understood enough to see the iron cage clearly. She saw how the hospital had transformed healing, once a sacred calling, into an industrial process. She saw how rationalization had stripped medicine of everything that made it meaningful, leaving only the measurable shell. She saw how her colleagues, good people who had entered nursing to help others, had slowly hardened into efficient processors of human bodies. She saw the cage, and she chose to stay soft inside it anyway, not out of ignorance, not because she didn't understand how the system worked, but because she had performed what Weber called value rational action. She had decided that some things matter more than advancement, more than efficiency, more than the approval of rationalized systems. Compassion matters. Human dignity matters. The dying patient who needs someone to hold their hand as they leave this world matters, even if that labor generates no revenue and appears in no performance metric. Weber would have recognized Maria as engaging in what he called substantive rationality, acting according to ultimate values rather than instrumental calculation, and he would have understood why the system could not tolerate her for long. Because soft resistance in a cold system is not passive, it is active rebellion. Every moment Maria chose presence over efficiency, she demonstrated that the system's values are not absolute. Every patient she treated as a full human rather than a processing unit, she proved that meaning exists beyond measurement. Every time she stayed soft, she showed that hardness is a choice, not an inevitability. This is why cold systems always attack softness. Not because softness is weak, but because it is the most fundamental threat to rationalized domination. Because if people remember that efficiency is not the highest value, the entire structure of modern economic life becomes questionable. Weber documented this pattern most clearly in his analysis of bureaucratic rationalization. Bureaucracy, he wrote, is the most rational form of domination precisely because it eliminates all personal, emotional, and irrational elements from decision-making. The perfect bureaucrat acts without hatred or passion, without affection or enthusiasm, simply according to calculable rules. This is presented as fairness, as objectivity. But Weber saw what it really is: the systematic elimination of humanity from human interaction, the transformation of persons into functions, the creation of a world where no one can be held accountable because everyone was just following the rules. And against this machine logic, some people insist on remaining persons, on acting from love when rules demand indifference, on seeing individuals when procedures recognize only categories, on bringing warmth to interactions the system designed to be cold. These people, Weber observed, are consistently punished by rationalized systems, passed over for promotion, labeled as problems, pushed out, not because they perform poorly, but because they perform according to different values than the ones the system rewards. Because a bureaucrat who acts from compassion rather than rules is unpredictable, cannot be controlled through procedural manipulation, might prioritize human welfare over organizational efficiency, represents the irrational element the system exists to eliminate. This is the feminine resistance Weber glimpsed but never fully theorized. Not feminine because only women do it, but feminine in the sense that it preserves qualities patriarchal rationalization has coded as female and therefore inferior. Care over competition, relationship over transaction, presence over productivity, meaning over measurement. Weber observed that modernity has created what he called a tremendous cosmos of the economic order, a machine so vast and powerful that individuals born into it must simply adapt or be crushed. The system, he wrote, determines their life with overwhelming force. But here lies the paradox Weber struggled with. The system requires human participation to function. It needs people to internalize its values, to police themselves according to its logic, to want what it rewards. And some people simply refuse, not by leaving the system entirely, which is often impossible, but by maintaining an inner life the system cannot reach, by preserving a self that measures worth differently than the market does, by staying soft in their core, even as they learn to navigate cold structures. Weber called this inner reservation, the psychological space where instrumental rationality does not penetrate, where you participate in rationalized systems out of necessity while maintaining ultimate values that contradict those systems, where you work within the cage while refusing to let it define your soul. And he observed that women maintained this inner reservation more successfully than men, not because of any essential femininity, but because their partial exclusion from fully rationalized economic life left them less thoroughly colonized by instrumental thinking. They had been trained since childhood to value relationships, emotional attunement, care for others. Things rationalized systems dismiss as soft, as impractical, as feminine in the pejorative sense. But these despised qualities are precisely what preserve humanity against total rationalization, because someone who values relationships as ends in themselves cannot be fully absorbed into a system that treats all relationships as means to other ends. Someone whose sense of worth comes from being a good mother, a caring friend, a present human cannot be completely controlled by a system that measures worth only through productivity. This is not about idealizing traditional gender roles, which Weber saw clearly were themselves forms of domination. This is about recognizing that the qualities assigned to women under patriarchy, precisely because they were excluded from economic rationalization, now represent resistance to total system domination. The soft skills that corporate culture now pretends to value while actually punishing. The emotional labor that holds society together while remaining uncompensated and unmeasured. The insistence on meaning in a world that recognizes only function. Weber understood that modernity faces a choice. Complete rationalization, where everything human is eliminated in pursuit of perfect efficiency, leading to what he called specialists without spirit, sensualists without heart, living in a nullity that imagines itself to have reached unprecedented heights of civilization, or conscious resistance to rationalization, maintaining spaces and practices and values that refuse instrumental logic, even while participating in rationalized systems out of necessity. And he believed this resistance would come primarily from those the system had failed to fully rationalize, those who maintained connection to pre-modern sources of meaning, traditional communities, religious practice, and yes, women whose lives had not been entirely absorbed into industrial capitalism's logic. But Weber also saw the danger. That soft resistance in cold systems destroys the people who practice it. That maintaining warmth in structures designed to freeze it out leaves you exhausted, marginalized, eventually crushed. That the system always wins in the end because it has power, and you have only your stubborn insistence on remaining human. This is the tragedy Weber documented. The people most necessary for preserving meaning in modern life are the ones modernity destroys most efficiently. Maria, the nurse who insisted on compassion, was eventually forced out of nursing entirely. The system cannot accommodate those who refuse its values. The iron cage is designed to eliminate exactly the qualities that make the cage bearable. Think about this pattern in your own life. The teacher who truly cared about students, forced out by standardized testing requirements. The social worker who treated clients as humans, buried in paperwork and metrics. The manager who prioritized people over profit, replaced by someone more willing to rationalize. the friend who maintained authentic relationships, exhausted by everyone treating friendship as networking. Weber called this the disenchantment of the world, the systematic elimination of magic, meaning, and mystery in favor of calculation and control. But disenchantment is not just intellectual. It is emotional and spiritual. The gradual hardening of the heart that modernity requires, the death of wonder, the replacement of genuine feeling with performed emotion, the transformation of the self into a machine that optimizes for external reward. And against this systematic soul death, some people insist on staying enchanted, on maintaining connection to beauty, to meaning, to the irrational dimensions of existence that make life worth living, on refusing to optimize themselves into machines. These are the soft ones, and the system hates them, because they prove that hardness is a choice, that the cage is not inevitable, that other ways of being remain possible even in the heart of rationalized modernity. Weber studied the rise of capitalism and traced how economic rationality colonized ever larger areas of human life, how the market logic of cost-benefit analysis spread from business transactions to personal relationships, to inner experience itself, how modern people learned to think of themselves as human capital to be invested wisely, as brands to be managed, as products to be optimized for maximum return. This is what he meant by the iron cage. Not just external economic structures, but the internalization of economic logic as the only valid way to think about human existence, where you measure your worth by your productivity, where you evaluate relationships by what they offer you, where you treat your own body as an asset to be efficiently managed, where everything becomes instrumental, means to other means, with no ultimate purpose beyond more of the same. And women, Weber observed, resisted this logic longest, not because they were irrational, though the system called them that, but because they maintained connection to substantive rationality, to values that exist beyond calculation. A mother's love for her child is not a cost-benefit analysis. It is absolute, unconditional, irrational in the system's terms. A friend's loyalty is not strategic networking. It is commitment that transcends utility. A woman's insistence that beauty matters, that kindness matters, that presence matters, even when these generate no measurable return. This is not weakness. This is the preservation of humanity against its systematic elimination. Weber wrote about the Protestant ethic's emphasis on calling, on vocation, on work as sacred duty, but he also documented how this spiritual motivation was gradually hollowed out, leaving only the external shell of compulsive productivity. Modern people work as hard as Puritans ever did, but without the spiritual meaning that made that work bearable. The calling became a cage, and those who try to restore meaning to their labor, who insist on working according to values rather than pure efficiency, discover that the system cannot tolerate them. You must produce according to its measures, or you are worthless. Your internal sense of purpose, your own evaluation of meaningful work, does not matter. Only the quantifiable output the system recognizes as valuable. This is what Maria discovered. That staying soft meant being systematically devalued by every metric the system uses to measure worth. Her compassion did not appear in any performance indicator. Her presence with dying patients generated no revenue. Her refusal to treat humans as processing units made her inefficient compared to nurses who had learned to harden themselves. And the system gave her a choice that was not really a choice. Adapt or leave. Become like us, or admit you cannot handle the job. Rationalize yourself, or fail. She chose to leave, not because she was weak, but because she understood that staying would eventually break what she most valued in herself, that the constant pressure to be cold would eventually freeze something essential, that the system's logic, if you submit to it long enough, colonizes your soul completely. Weber called this the paradox of rationalization. The systems we create to serve human needs end up dominating us. The tools become masters. The means become ends, and we find ourselves serving the machine we built to serve us. But here lies something Weber saw, but could not quite articulate. The system's power depends on universal participation. If everyone agrees that efficiency is the only value, that productivity measures worth, that calculation should govern all decisions, then the iron cage becomes inescapable. But if some people refuse, if they maintain other values, if they stay soft when hardness is demanded, then the system's claim to inevitability collapses. Because you prove through your existence that alternatives are possible, that the cage is not natural, that we chose this and we could choose differently. This is why soft resistance is so dangerous to rationalized systems, not because it overthrows them through force, but because it exposes their contingency through presence. You do not need to argue that compassion matters more than efficiency. You simply act with compassion and let the system justify why it punishes you for it. You do not need to prove that relationships have intrinsic value. You treat people as valuable in themselves and force the system to explain why that is wrong. You do not need to demonstrate that beauty and meaning are worth preserving. You preserve them in your own life and make visible what rationalization destroys. Weber documented several historical cases of this soft resistance, though he did not always recognize it as such. The Quakers who insisted on economic ethics when capitalism demanded amoral calculation. The medieval mystics who maintained direct religious experience when the church demanded obedience to rationalized theology. The artisans who refused industrial efficiency in favor of craft quality. All were pushed aside by rationalizing forces. All were dismissed as impractical, inefficient obstacles to progress. All preserved something essential that modernity could not replace. And in his darker moments, Weber believed they would lose. That rationalization would continue until nothing irrational remained. Until every human quality had been calculated, measured, optimized, and ultimately eliminated in favor of perfect mechanical efficiency. Until we became, as he wrote, specialists without spirit, sensualists without heart, living in a cage we had built but could no longer escape. But Weber also left open another possibility, that the very extremity of rationalization would eventually provoke resistance, that the complete elimination of meaning would become unbearable, that the cage would become so suffocating that even those who built it would desperately seek escape. And he suggested that this resistance, when it came, would look like what he called charismatic renewal, the emergence of leaders or movements that challenged rational legal authority by appealing to value rationality, who said no, efficiency is not the highest good, human dignity matters more. No, productivity is not the measure of worth, being matters more than doing. No, we will not optimize ourselves out of existence, we will stay human even if it costs us everything. These charismatic movements, Weber observed, usually fail. The rationalized system is too powerful, too entrenched, too good at crushing anything that challenges its logic. But sometimes they succeed in creating protected spaces, communities where different values govern, relationships where calculation does not dominate, lives organized around meaning rather than measurement. This is what soft resistance creates. Not revolution that overthrows the system, but protected spaces where the system's logic does not fully penetrate. Families where love is unconditional rather than earned. Friendships where loyalty is not strategic. Work where purpose matters more than profit. Small islands of warmth in a cold ocean. Weber called these value spheres. Areas of life governed by their own internal logic rather than universal instrumental rationality. Religion that maintains transcendent meaning. Art that insists on beauty beyond utility. Personal relationships that refuse to become transactions. He observed that modernity systematically attacks these value spheres, trying to rationalize them, to bring them under universal calculation. Religion becomes an industry selling spiritual products. Art becomes an investment asset class. Relationships become networking opportunities. Everything that once had meaning in itself becomes a means to something else. And those who try to protect these value spheres, who insist that some things should not be rationalized, are always fighting a losing battle against more powerful forces. But they fight anyway, because the alternative is complete capitulation to the machine, total rationalization of the soul, the transformation of human beings into perfectly efficient components of a system that serves no purpose beyond its own perpetuation. And Weber believed that women, precisely because they had been partially excluded from economic rationalization, maintained strongest connection to these endangered value spheres, not because femininity is essentially irrational, but because the qualities assigned to women under patriarchy, care, relationship, emotional attunement, are precisely the qualities rationalized systems most need to eliminate. A woman who insists these qualities matter is not being irrational. She is engaging in substantive rationality, evaluating actions according to ultimate values rather than mere efficiency. She is preserving what modernity destroys. She is staying soft when the system demands hardness, and the system punishes her for it. Calls her emotional when she responds to human suffering. Calls her impractical when she prioritizes relationship over productivity. Calls her inefficient when she insists on quality over speed. Pushes her out of leadership positions where her values might interfere with rationalized decision-making. The iron cage cannot accommodate those who refuse to be iron. Think about the women in your own life who have maintained this soft resistance. Your grandmother who insisted on hospitality even when entertaining was inefficient. Your mother who prioritized your well-being over her career advancement. Your teacher who cared about your growth when the system measured only test scores. Your friend who showed up in crisis when being present generated no return. These women were not weak. They were strong enough to resist the most powerful force in modern society. The systematic pressure to harden yourself, to optimize yourself, to become a perfectly efficient machine component. They stayed human when humanity was being eliminated. They maintained warmth when warmth was being systematically frozen out. They proved through their lives that other ways of being remain possible. Weber called what they practiced everyday charisma, not the dramatic charisma of prophets and leaders, but the quiet charisma of those who embody values the system cannot rationalize, who demonstrate through presence that efficiency is not the only measure of worth, who create through relationship what the market cannot provide, who preserve through love what calculation destroys. This everyday charisma is harder to sustain than dramatic charismatic leadership, because it receives no recognition, generates no reward, leads not to power but to marginalization. The soft ones are always pushed aside by harder, more efficient, more rational operators, always made to feel that their way is wrong, outdated, impractical, always exhausted by swimming against the current of systematic rationalization, and yet they persist, because something in them refuses to surrender, refuses to let the system define what matters, refuses to measure their worth by its metrics, refuses to harden even when hardness is the only quality the system rewards. Weber understood this persistence as irrational in the system's terms. There is no strategic reason to stay soft. Hardness is always rewarded. Efficiency always advances. Instrumental rationality always wins in instrumental terms. The soft ones lose careers, opportunities, advancement, recognition. They sacrifice their own success to preserve qualities the system dismisses as worthless. From the perspective of rational self-interest, they are fools. But from the perspective of substantive rationality, they are the only ones still sane. Because they remember that efficiency is not the purpose of human existence, that productivity does not justify a life, that being a perfectly optimized machine component is not an achievement, but a tragedy. They stay soft not out of weakness but out of strength, the strength to resist the most powerful form of domination modernity has created. Not domination through force, which can be opposed, but domination through internalization, through making you want what the system needs, through teaching you to measure your worth by its standards, through colonizing your soul so completely that you police yourself according to its logic without any external coercion being necessary. Against this invisible domination, softness is rebellion. Maintaining your own values is resistance. Refusing to optimize yourself is freedom, even if that freedom exists only in the inner spaces the system has not yet learned to colonize. Weber wrote about inner-worldly asceticism, the Protestant practice of rigorous self-discipline in service of salvation, but he also documented how this spiritual practice became purely external. How self-discipline divorced from spiritual purpose became just another tool of capitalist domination. How the inner life was hollowed out, leaving only the shell of compulsive productivity. The tragedy of modernity, he wrote, is that we have kept all the discipline of religious asceticism while losing the transcendent purpose that made it meaningful. We are monks serving no God, following rules that lead nowhere, optimizing ourselves for systems that serve no ultimate human purpose. And those who try to restore purpose, to reconnect discipline with meaning, to make their labor serve values beyond mere productivity, Discover that the system has no place for them. You must work for its purposes or you are useless. Your own sense of calling, your personal values, your individual meaning. These are private matters that should not interfere with efficient functioning. You are not a person with purposes. You are a resource to be efficiently utilized. This is what Weber meant by the disenchantment of the world. Not just the loss of magic and mystery, but the elimination of the very idea that human existence should have purpose beyond its own efficient perpetuation. The machine runs, and we serve it, and if you ask why, you receive no answer except that the machine must run. To stay soft in such a system is to maintain the question the system cannot answer, to insist that purpose matters. That meaning is not optional. That human existence should serve something beyond mere survival and reproduction of the system. This insistence has no instrumental value. It generates no profit. It contributes nothing to efficiency. The system regards it as at best irrelevant, at worst actively destructive of smooth functioning. But it is the only thing that makes existence bearable. Because without purpose, without meaning, without values that transcend calculation, we are already dead. Just machines that have not yet stopped functioning. Weber saw this living death all around him, in his colleagues who had become academic machines, producing papers without passion or purpose, in businessmen who had become money-making automatons, accumulating wealth without knowing why, in political leaders who pursued power as an end in itself, having forgotten what power should serve, in ordinary people who worked, consumed, reproduced, and died without ever asking whether their life had meaning beyond its efficient execution. And he saw it in himself, the moments when he could feel the cage closing in, when his own thinking became too rationalized, too systematic, too detached from the human realities he was trying to understand, when he became the scholar analyzing life, rather than the person living it. His nervous breakdown, the years of incapacity, were perhaps his psyche's rebellion against excessive rationalization of his own inner life, the soft parts of himself that refused to be completely systematized, the emotional, irrational, human dimensions that could not be captured in sociological categories. He needed to stay soft enough to understand what rationalization was destroying. But staying soft in academic culture that rewarded only hard systematic thinking nearly destroyed him. This is the danger Weber documented but could not solve. That seeing the cage clearly makes it harder to bear. That understanding rationalization does not free you from it. That maintaining soft resistance exhausts you while the system remains unchanged. Maria understood this when she left nursing. She could see clearly what the system was doing. How it was systematically eliminating care from healthcare, humanity from human services, meaning from medicine. She understood the logic perfectly, but understanding did not give her power to change it, and staying within it while maintaining her values was destroying her. So she chose something Weber rarely discussed as an option. She left, not to withdraw from the world entirely, but to create a different space where different values could govern. She became a hospice volunteer. Unpaid labor the system does not recognize as productive. Sitting with dying people in their final days, holding hands, listening to stories, bearing witness to lives ending. Everything Weber would recognize as value-rational action, behavior that makes sense according to ultimate values about human dignity and meaning, but generates no measurable output, contributes nothing to economic productivity, appears in no metric the rationalized system uses to count what matters. And Maria told me once, this is the only work that feels real. Everything else was just processing bodies through a system. This is actually caring for souls. She stayed soft by leaving the cold system, by creating a protected space where coldness had no power, where efficiency was not the measure of worth, where she could be fully human in the presence of other humans. But Weber would also note the limitation of this solution, that hospice exists at the margins, that it is possible only because it deals with people the economic system has already abandoned as non-productive, that if it actually threatened rationalized medicine's dominance, it would be absorbed, commodified, rationalized, turned into another efficient process with metrics and outcomes and billing codes. The system permits small pockets of irrationality, as long as they remain small, as long as they do not challenge the overall logic, as long as those who maintain them understand they have chosen marginalization. This is the price of staying soft. You can preserve your humanity by leaving the system's rewards behind. You can maintain meaning by accepting marginalization. You can stay warm by remaining at the edges where the cold efficiency of the center does not penetrate. But you cannot change the center. The iron cage remains. Most people stay locked inside it, and those who escape do so only by accepting exile. Weber called this the tragedy of modern vocational ethics, that those who try to work according to values, according to calling, according to meaning, are systematically pushed out by those who work according to pure instrumental rationality. The marketplace rewards efficiency over ethics, calculation over care, hardness over humanity. And over time, all vocations become rationalized. Medicine becomes healthcare industry. Teaching becomes education delivery system. Ministry becomes church management. Social work becomes case processing. Every field that once had an ethical core, a sense of calling, a commitment to values beyond mere effectiveness, gets hollowed out. The forms remain, but the meaning is gone. And those who try to preserve the meaning, who insist on practicing their vocation according to its original ethical purpose, are labeled as problems. Inefficient, impractical, unable to adapt to modern requirements. They are pushed out, burned out, worn down, until they either harden themselves or leave entirely. This is why Weber was so pessimistic about modernity's future, because the system that destroys meaning is more powerful than those who try to preserve it. Because rationalization is self-reinforcing. The more areas of life it conquers, the harder it becomes to imagine alternatives. The more thoroughly we are trained to think instrumentally, the less capacity we have for substantive rationality. The cage becomes stronger the longer we live in it. But Weber also believed that complete rationalization was impossible, that something in human nature resists total mechanization, that the irrational dimensions of existence, the need for meaning, for beauty, for love, for purpose beyond mere survival, cannot be entirely eliminated. They go underground. They find expression in areas the system has not yet learned to control. They surface in crisis moments when the rational facade cracks. They persist in the soft ones who refuse to harden despite everything. This is not optimism exactly. Weber was too clear-eyed about power dynamics to believe that resistance alone could transform the system. But it is recognition that the system is not omnipotent, that islands of meaning can survive, that protected spaces can exist, that some people will always insist on staying human even when everything around them rewards becoming machines. And sometimes, Weber observed, these islands of resistance become seeds of larger transformation. When rationalized systems fail, when their internal contradictions become unbearable, when the cage becomes so suffocating that even those who built it desperately seek escape, people remember that alternatives exist. They look to those who maintained different values. They seek out the soft ones who preserved what rationalization destroyed. The mystics who maintained transcendent meaning when religion became rationalized ritual. The artists who insisted on beauty when art became mere commodity. The mothers who loved unconditionally when relationships became calculated exchanges. The teachers who cared about persons when education became credentialing factory. These are the ones who remember how to be human, who preserved the knowledge that gets lost in rationalized systems, who maintained practices the system dismissed as worthless, but that turn out to be essential for meaning-making. When the cage becomes unbearable, people seek them out, not because they offer efficiency or success, but because they offer something the system cannot provide: authenticity, connection, purpose, the sense that existence means something beyond its own efficient reproduction. Weber called this charismatic renewal, though he recognized it could also be dangerous, that the reaction against excessive rationalization might lead not to healthy rebalancing, but to irrational explosions, to fascism, to fundamentalism, to reactionary movements that try to restore pre-modern forms of domination in place of modern rational legal authority. The soft resistance he valued was different, not rejection of rationality entirely, but insistence that instrumental rationality serve ultimate values rather than become an end in itself. Not abandonment of modern knowledge and technology, but refusal to let technical thinking colonize all of human existence. Not withdrawal from the world, but participation in rationalized systems while maintaining inner reservation. The ability to work within the cage while refusing to let it define your soul. This is what Weber called tragic participation. Engaging with modernity's systems because you must, because complete withdrawal is impossible or irresponsible, while maintaining consciousness that these systems do not deserve your full allegiance, that their values are not ultimate, that you serve them only instrumentally while preserving other values that matter more. And he believed women practiced this tragic participation more consciously than men, because men, more fully absorbed into economic rationalization, more thoroughly colonized by instrumental thinking, more rewarded for hardness and efficiency, lost touch with the inner reservation. They became what the system needed them to be. Women, still operating partially in domestic and relational spheres the system had not fully rationalized, maintained greater ability to see the cage clearly while navigating it strategically, to work within rational legal structures while preserving rational commitments, to participate in instrumental systems while maintaining ultimate purposes those systems could not recognize. This is not about biological femininity. Weber was clear that gender itself is socially constructed, that the qualities assigned to women are products of specific historical conditions. But he also recognized that those conditions created psychological and social patterns worth preserving against rationalization's march. The capacity for relationship as end in itself, the insistence that persons have worth beyond their utility, the maintenance of emotional attunement and care as central human capabilities, the refusal to measure everything by instrumental standards. These became coded as feminine precisely because rationalized economic systems pushed them out of the male-dominated public sphere. But they are human capacities, necessary for meaningful existence, essential for social cohesion, beyond mere contractual exchange, and they are systematically devalued, dismissed, eliminated in modern rationalized society. Those who maintain them, who insist they matter, who stay soft when the system demands hardness, pay a price for their resistance. But they also preserve what everyone needs for life to remain bearable. This is the service Weber glimpsed but could not quite articulate. That the soft ones, the ones who refuse to harden, who maintain values the system dismisses, are not just preserving their own humanity. They are maintaining possibility for everyone. They prove that alternatives exist. They demonstrate that the cage is not natural or inevitable. They keep alive the memory that human existence should serve something beyond mere efficiency. When you meet someone who has stayed soft in a system that rewards the cold, you are meeting someone who has maintained tragic consciousness, who sees clearly how the world works but refuses to surrender to its logic, who participates in rationalized structures while preserving inner values those structures cannot colonize, who pays the price of marginalization to preserve what matters. These are not naive people who don't understand how the system works. They are consciously resistant people who understand exactly how it works and refuse to let it determine what they value. They have chosen meaning over success, presence over productivity, humanity over efficiency, and the system has punished them for it. But here is what Weber understood and what we often forget. The system's punishment, the marginalization and devaluation and exile it imposes on those who refuse its values, is proof of their power. Because if staying soft was truly weak, the system would ignore it. The fact that cold systems must actively attack softness, must systematically eliminate care and relationship and meaning, shows that these qualities threaten the rationalized order. A woman who insists on compassion in a healthcare system governed by efficiency metrics is not just being nice. She is challenging the foundational logic that organizes modern medicine. She is saying through her actions that healing is more than processing bodies efficiently, that patients are persons with dignity and meaning, not just units to be moved through the system. And the system must silence her, push her out, discredit her, because if she is right, then everything the system is built on becomes questionable. This is why Weber called soft resistance dangerous. Not dangerous to the people who practice it, though it is certainly costly for them. Dangerous to the system itself, because it exposes what rationalization destroys, because it makes visible what we are asked to sacrifice for efficiency, because it offers living proof that other ways of being remain possible. And when enough people see that proof, When enough people remember that alternatives exist, the cage begins to feel like a cage, rather than simply the natural order of things. This is the transformation Weber hoped for but could not quite believe would happen. That consciousness of the iron cage, awareness of what rationalization destroys, might eventually provoke resistance sufficient to transform the system itself, not through dramatic revolution, which he believed rationalized systems are too powerful to permit, but through accumulation of small refusals. The teacher who maintains care despite metrics, the doctor who sees patients as persons despite efficiency requirements, the manager who values employees beyond their productivity, the parent who loves unconditionally despite parenting becoming resume building, the friend who stays loyal despite friendship becoming networking. Each small refusal, each maintenance of softness, each insistence on meaning, is a crack in the cage, none sufficient alone to break it, but together, cumulatively, demonstrating that the system does not have total power, that we can choose differently, that staying human remains possible even in the heart of rationalized modernity. Weber wrote about the disenchantment of the world as if it were an inevitable historical process, but he also left open another possibility: conscious re-enchantment, the deliberate choice to maintain meaning, to create beauty, to preserve mystery, even in a world that has systematically eliminated these dimensions. Not through regression to pre-modern forms. You cannot go back to traditional religion after recognizing it as socially constructed, cannot return to inherited meanings after consciousness has dissolved them, cannot restore the naive enchantment that modernity destroyed. But you can choose enchantment consciously, can create meaning with full awareness that you are creating it, can preserve beauty knowing it serves no instrumental purpose, can maintain wonder deliberately as an act of resistance against total rationalization. This is what staying soft means in Weber's framework. Not ignorance of how the system works, but conscious refusal to let the system determine what matters. Not weakness in face of rationalization, but strength to maintain values the system dismisses. Not inability to harden, but choice to remain human despite everything. And this conscious choice is available to anyone. You do not need permission from the system. Do not need it to recognize your values or reward your choices. Do not need to wait for others to join you or for the culture to change. You can simply decide that some things matter more than efficiency, that some values are worth preserving even if they cost you advancement, that staying soft, maintaining humanity, insisting on meaning, are worth the price of marginalization, because the alternative is becoming what the system needs you to be: a perfectly efficient component, a human machine serving machine logic, someone who produces and consumes and dies without ever having lived. Weber saw around him people who had made this devil's bargain, who had traded their humanity for success within rationalized systems, who measured their worth by the metrics the system provided because they had lost connection to any other source of value, who were rich in everything the market recognizes and utterly impoverished in everything that makes existence meaningful. And he saw others who refused the bargain, who accepted poverty, marginalization, exile rather than surrender their values, who stayed soft despite everything, who preserved what the system destroyed, who demonstrated through their lives that humans are more than efficient production functions. These were his heroes, though he was too rigorously scientific in his sociology to say so directly. The religious virtuosos who maintained genuine faith when religion became rationalized institution. The artists who created beauty for its own sake when art became commodity. The intellectuals who pursued truth regardless of practical application when knowledge became instrumental. The ordinary people who maintained authentic relationships when everything became calculated exchange. They were irrational in the system's terms. Their choices made no strategic sense. They sacrificed material success and social standing to preserve things the world dismissed as worthless. But Weber believed they were preserving what makes human existence bearable, what gives life meaning beyond mere survival, what transforms biological existence into something that might approach the transcendent purposes religion once provided. Without them, rationalization would complete its march toward total domination. We would become the specialist without spirit, the sensualist without heart, living in perfect efficiency and absolute meaninglessness. With them, maintaining their stubborn, soft resistance, other possibilities remain alive. The memory that life can mean something beyond its own reproduction. The knowledge that humans are capable of values that transcend calculation. The proof that staying human, despite everything, remains possible. This is what Weber offers us. Not hope that the system will change. He was too clear about power dynamics for that. But recognition that we can choose how we participate in it. Can maintain inner reservation even while engaging outwardly. Can stay soft in our core while learning to navigate cold structures. Can insist on meaning even in a disenchanted world. And the soft ones, especially women who have been partially excluded from complete rationalization, who have maintained connection to value spheres the system has not entirely conquered, they offer something essential. Living proof that alternatives exist. Demonstration that other ways of being are possible. Protection of capacities everyone needs but the system eliminates. When you meet someone who has stayed soft, who has maintained warmth in cold systems, who insists on meaning when everything is measured only by efficiency, you are meeting someone engaged in profound resistance. They are not weak. They are strong enough to refuse the most powerful force in modern society. They are not naive. They understand exactly what they are sacrificing and why it matters. They are not behind the times. They are ahead, maintaining what everyone will eventually need when rationalization becomes unbearable. And they are not alone, even when the system makes them feel isolated. Because staying soft is not individual pathology. It is human resistance to inhuman systems. It is the preservation of meaning against its systematic elimination. It is the maintenance of the irrational dimensions of existence that make life worth living. Weber could not tell you that staying soft will make you successful. The system rewards hardness, efficiency, instrumental calculation. He could not promise that your resistance will transform structures. Rationalized systems are too powerful for individual refusal to overthrow them. He could not even assure you that others will understand or appreciate what you are preserving. Most people are too thoroughly colonized by instrumental thinking to recognize value rationality when they see it. But he could tell you this, that staying soft is worth it, that maintaining your humanity despite everything is not just personally meaningful, but culturally essential, that your stubborn insistence on values the system dismisses preserves possibilities everyone needs, that you are not weak for refusing to harden. You are strong enough to resist. And perhaps if enough people stay soft, if enough refuse to let rationalization determine what matters, if enough maintain meaning in a disenchanted world, the cage might begin to feel less inevitable. The bars might become visible rather than invisible. The possibility of different organization might become thinkable again, not through revolution that overthrows the system in a moment, but through accumulated resistance that demonstrates alternatives never died. That humans maintained them in protected spaces in inner reservations in the soft ones who refuse to harden. That when the cage becomes unbearable, we can remember other ways of being, because some people preserved them against everything. This is the gift of those who stay soft. Not weakness, not failure to adapt, but conscious maintenance of humanity against its systematic elimination. And if you are one of them, know that Weber saw you, understood what you are doing, recognized the cost and the value of your resistance. You are not alone in refusing to become what the system demands. You are not naive for insisting that meaning matters. You are not weak for maintaining softness in cold systems. You are preserving what makes human existence bearable. You are demonstrating that alternatives remain possible. You are staying human when everything rewards becoming machines. And that is not just personally admirable. It is culturally essential. It is what keeps the door open to futures less totally rationalized. It is proof that the cage is not inevitable. So stay soft, not because it will be rewarded, but because it preserves what matters. Not because others will understand, but because you refuse to let the system determine your values. Not because it is easy, but because the alternative is surrendering your humanity to machine logic. The world needs your stubborn softness, your insistence on meaning, your refusal to optimize yourself out of existence, your demonstration that other ways of being remain possible even in the heart of rationalized modernity. Weber documented the iron cage, but he also showed us that some people refuse to be imprisoned, That consciousness creates space for resistance. That staying soft is not weakness but the most profound form of strength. The strength to remain human when everything demands you becomes something else. If this resonated with you, if you recognize yourself among the soft ones trying to stay warm in cold systems, share in the comments which form of soft resistance you practice. Your story connects with others walking this same difficult path. And consider subscribing to this channel, where we continue exploring how classical sociology helps us understand and navigate the systems trying to rationalize us out of existence. If you want to go deeper into Weber's analysis of the iron cage and how modern structures systematically eliminate meaning, watch my video on the 3 forms of rationalization Weber identified and how each one operates in your daily life. Until we meet again in reflection, stay soft when they demand you harden. Stay human when they want you mechanical. Stay meaningful when they measure only efficiency. Because you are not behind the times. You are ahead, preserving what everyone will eventually need. The cage is powerful, but it is not omnipotent. And your soft resistance proves it every single day.